Cool. Alrighty, we are back with episode, 25 of the Breakeven Brothers podcast. It's a beautiful summer evening in Arizona. It's a peachy, I don't know, 104 degrees right now at 10 o'clock at night. So
Jeez.
that's crazy. Brad, how's it going? How are you doing?
Excellent. Just came back from a weekend in Vancouver. Would highly recommend it to people who are interested in visiting Canada. I think Vancouver is hit all the marks. Great food, great transportation, high variety and things to do, sightseeing, activities, outdoors, and pretty easy to just like book things. Like there wasn't long waits. And again, I think maybe I already mentioned this. The food is freaking good. Had sushi. I was just in Japan not that long ago. I had sushi in a sunset in Vancouver on the beach, and the sushi was cheap and really good. So yeah, feeling energized and was just a great time. So I was there for 4 days from Friday to Monday. Jam-packed schedule, really long days. I feel like I did it all in a good sense, but yeah, it was excellent. If you're thinking about traveling to Canada, Vancouver is a great spot. And I stayed in Cole Harbor. I think hotel was in an excellent location. So would highly, highly recommend that.
Yeah, that's cool. One thing I didn't ask you, we're talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but one thing I didn't ask you is when I was there last time, the Canadian dollar was stronger than the American dollar or the US dollar. And so things
Mhm.
felt more expensive. I think as of right now, I haven't looked in a while, but I know for a time at least, it was the US dollar was stronger than the Canadian dollar. And so did you feel that? Did everything, you said cheap, so that's kind of what picked me up on it, but did it feel like
Yeah,
things were cheaper? Like you felt like you were getting more bang for your buck?
definitely. Yeah, I think it's right now it's uh one Canadian dollar is like zero point 0.7 US dollars. So you definitely get like a, 30% discount. And so food was cheaper. Honestly, it felt a little bit cheaper overall to begin with, but I think the currency does give you a little bit of a slight edge and not as cheap as like Asian countries potentially, but pretty good quality for, being a neighboring country. And yeah, pretty nice, very, very cost effective. And yeah, the food freaking good. Prices pretty
Yeah.
good. I think the one thing that I was surprised that cost a bit of money was they have this suspension bridge park, which is like a very kind of manufactured tourist attraction where they have a long suspension bridge about 250 feet, or yeah, I think 250 feet or some 200 feet, maybe like
Yeah.
200 feet high. And I think the ticket was like 70 CAD or like $50. And it's not that crazy. I mean, it's cool. Like, don't get me wrong, but that was like the one thing that I felt like out of getting sushi for two people for like, I don't know, 40 CAD, getting a ticket of like 70 CAD per person for 3 hours at a park. Cool
Mhm.
exhibit, cool park. But that part was more expensive than I thought. But yeah, overall, very cheap. Very
Yeah.
good food, very good quality. Transit was really cheap too. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would highly recommend. Thanks for pushing us that way. I know Ben's been talking to me about it for at least like 2 or 3 years, and it had been on my list. So we finally made the decision to go.
Yeah. Well, you and your wife, you guys are big travelers. So the fact that I had been somewhere that you guys had not, I was like, oh, cool. I can contribute to this conversation a little bit. But yeah, that's really cool. One thing I remember, and we can move on from Canada, but one thing I remember thinking when I was there was obviously things being more expensive again because of the dollar situation, but then also too the food being much fresher. And when I say that is because I think when I was there, I'd either just graduated or was about to graduate college. So I wasn't making much money, and I was kind of just, doing it on a budget. And I remember we went to Chipotle, and one, I remember it being more expensive. So I remember being like two burritos like $20, and like at that time, that was like, oh whoa! I remember this being like $15 back at home. Again, this is like 10 years ago. And then, but two, I remember it tasting so much better. And I think, my wife and I, this is no proof in this, but we just thought that it's the cheese. Like the cheese was like, didn't have all the,
Mm.
you hear about when people go to Europe, they lose weight eating the same foods because, in
Yeah.
Europe, they don't have all the, seed oils and whatever the case may be. But like, I remember being like, oh, this is actually way better. Like the food is actually better too. Um, compared to the same version in the US, if you're having like a fast food chain. So
Yeah, I didn't
I don't
have
know.
any cheesy dishes, but I can definitely plus one on that. I think the food quality is better, cheaper, and the service is good. I feel like they really care about people. And again, it's comparing like Japan or Korea to Canada. They're not as like outwardly friendly as Japanese folks, but
Mhm.
they're up there. Like they care, and good service all around for all the places that we went to. So we ate out quite a bit at that time, and yeah, totally would recommend if it's on your list.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. All right. Well, glad you're back. Glad you're recharged. One of the first things that we want to talk about in this episode is some recent news surrounding, I'd say, talent. And we touched on this a little bit last episode when we talked about I'm going to say, quote, poaching of OpenAI researchers, employees, whatever you want to call them, over to Meta for like really large sums of money, really large compensation packages. So we touched on this a little bit last episode, but what's really interesting now is there's been some additional folks going over there. So I think just as of today, I think I saw an article. Two folks were going from OpenAI over to Meta, to the Meta Superintelligence team that Mark Zuckerberg's putting together with the Scale AI guy, Alexander Wang, running it. And what's really interesting to me is a couple questions that kind of come out of this. I think one is, when something like of this magnitude, like these kinds of headlines, one thing that kind of draws in mind, at least to me, is like where does Meta kind of see this playing out? Because ultimately, to pay that kind of money, and we're talking rumored to be $100 million offers, like all in total comp, to be paying that kind of money, there has to be an ROI for that. So right now, if you think about where Meta is, they're very much in the space where they have the llama models, the open source kind of local models that you can run, but they're not really in the same breadth of like the foundational models like OpenAI and Gemini, Claude. So like, what do you make of what Meta's trying to do with that Meta superintelligence team, and just the news that these I keep saying, I want to say execs because that's kind of what they're getting paid as, but I don't think they're really executives. They're more like
Different, yeah,
researchers, yeah, and
yeah,
engineers.
because they get paid more than that. Like an Apple employee. I think we talked last podcast a little bit about this, but Apple employee got poached for like 300 million, OpenAI 100 million, 200 million. Like it's in the large sums of money. But since our last podcast when we talked about it, I think there's two updates. One is that it continues to happen. It's not something that existed once and is over. And then two, there has been a little bit of discussion about Meta transitioning to a closed source model. So previously, I think Meta was just trying to get general intelligence out there, take a lot of money, funnel it in, have something that everyone can use to kind of set the playing field. Now I think they've accumulated, you know, research talent from all these competing AI labs that it could be time for Meta to take a step into, a commercialized closed source model, kind of like OpenAI and Anthropic. So I'm not sure. I think, last podcast we talked about them coming up with unique social experiences. I'm not
Mm.
sure that's the case anymore. And with the AI hype and the AI craze, things change very rapidly. This feels like an AI talent war, so to speak. Like people are getting poached left and right, either from OpenAI to OpenAI, to Meta, from Meta, etc. But I think Meta definitely has the biggest paychecks right now, at least for AI talent. So lots of people are going there. Oh, and the third thing that I just remembered is that Zuckerberg, I think, went on a news publication and mentioned that Meta is building this massive AI factory of just having tons of AI chips and GPUs. And I think
Yeah.
that part kind of plays into the mission of, you imagine you're talking to a top researcher from OpenAI. It's, oh, we'll pay you great money. We'll give you like unlimited resources for you to tinker on things because as a researcher, engineer, experimenter, don't you want that? And then
Mhm.
three, it's probably like you're going to be with other smart people. OpenAI definitely has a pretty impressive roster that they have today, but pulling, top leaders from Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, it's just been this talent mishmash of just getting people to join these different companies. I think Meta has a pretty strategic and compelling offer, all things considered, with high cash, unlimited resources, and people who are just as smart as you, hand plucked from other companies. So I don't know what they'll do with that. Hopefully they make a big impact. It'll probably be either social, adding it to Facebook, Instagram, the family of apps over there, or two, going closed source and trying to compete with the Anthropic and OpenAIs of the world. I'm not sure where they'll end up,
Mhm.
but those are I feel like two real strategies for them right now.
Yeah, and what you're referring to, I think they call it like an AI supercluster. I think they've named it Prometheus and Hyperion. Yeah, and I'm not. I think they said that they're using it to train like their own large language models in the future, and I think expected to go live in 2026, the first one. So, because I think we touched on that a little bit last episode. I think it was last episode about like the energy requirements
Yeah.
needed to fuel those kinds of things, which is kind of coming into play. So one thing I found interesting, Brad, I guess on the topic of like talent is this when you read any like TechCrunch or Wired article, they're using the term poaching a lot, and we've used that term too. And it's really interesting because I think poaching, and maybe this is just me, I want to kind of get your thoughts on it, is it's kind of like a negative term, like it's illegal to poach, like animals and stuff like that, right? Um, why can't they say recruited? Some articles do, but I think there's been a lot of emphasis on the kind of poaching and almost like an acquisition type language, and to kind of reinforce that, I don't say negative connotation with these moves. The OpenAI team, I think the individual's name is Mark Chen. I think he's like the chief research officer. Don't quote me on that, but his name is Mark. And he had like a memo sent out to employees after one of the rounds of people going over to Meta, where he said, and I think the article quoted that it feels like someone broke into our house and stole something.
Mhm.
Now, do you obviously understand that it's a big loss for an org to lose smart people? That's just always the case. But in this scenario, it seemed like, these are people that have their own free will to go work somewhere else. They get paid good money. From what I understand from the articles I've read, that OpenAI countered these offers, at least to some extent. But what do you think about kind of OpenAI kind of casting this as like Meta's doing something unethical or distasteful? I think is one of the words that they've used. And Sam Altman said, the CEO of OpenAI, said that missionaries. What do you say? He said missionaries prevail over mercenaries, something like that, and that OpenAI is on a mission and Meta's
Mhm.
doing something else. What do you think about that kind of painting of the sides that OpenAI is trying to do with what Meta's doing?
I think Meta comes out swinging, and I think that's the poaching of these massive offers that are hard to decline, and two, the timeline in which these individuals are given to make a choice. I
Hmm.
think some of the reporting came out recently that they're given literally hours. I've been in, job negotiations. I've never had an hours timeline, but that sounds really stressful. And I'm also not getting paid 100 million. So you could put those together of $100 million in 4 hours and make a decision. That feels like a ton of pressure. And you're, head honcho at OpenAI or one of the head honchos. That I think is why it's characterized as poaching because, important person, strict deadline, and high pay. It puts you in a spot where you can't make the most rash decision. You kind of just have to go with what you think. And when you see people around you taking this package, you think, oh, maybe I'm missing out. Maybe I could get paid a lot and, enjoy my time. But I do like how you bring up Sam's quote because I think right now OpenAI can't really compete with these offers because they're not public. Like they are being evaluated at an evaluation that is probably disclosed every so often. I'm not a startup guy, but I think Sam had pitched it as it's the mission, it's the people who stay here, and two, I think our company will be worth a lot. I think he had mentioned the value in terms of dollars, but wasn't able to provide a concrete like we're paying you 100 million because evaluations change and competition comes and goes as we see in the AI space. But overall, I think it's the pressure, the pay, and just seeing people around you kind of not crack, but make that decision to go, and that makes you kind of feel like a sinking ship. So I wonder if these people have any regrets. I mean, probably not since they get paid a lot, but you never know until you get there. Maybe Meta turns out to be a crapshoot and all these smart people don't have the authority, or maybe there's too many smart people in the room to like make an impact. Hard to
Hmm.
say, but I think from the reporting, it was very clear that Meta put them under tight control and tight timeline, probably to force a decision to get them to join. That's very strategic, like recruiting,
Hmm.
to get them to be like, hey, you have no time, and here's your juicy offer, take it or leave it. And clearly it made an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw a couple other things from OpenAI and Sam that were interesting. I think they, said that they're kind of more mission based, and they're here, um, kind of building something different than Meta is kind of what they've tried to paint. And I did see the quote where he talked about how I think he said there's more upside in OpenAI stock than Meta. That was obviously his opinion, but of course, he probably said that to the people that were thinking about leaving or had offers in hand, and was trying to kind of leverage, OpenAI is going to be worth more down the road. Um, but I do find the OpenAI framing of this to be a little interesting in terms of like unethical and again distasteful and poaching and stealing, right? Because and maybe you find this ironic or not. I certainly do, because they have a kind of a unique, and some would say borderline unethical, like entity structure where they're like a nonprofit and they're
Yeah.
private, and no one's got their hands clean of everything. But I did find that interesting to kind of say that when they are not paying any, from what I understand, again, private company, but from what I understand, they have a nonprofit status that lets them not pay taxes, and surely they're raking in, billions of dollars in revenue. You figure. So I found that to be a little rich, but I don't know what your thoughts
Yeah.
are on that.
There's been a lot of talk about OpenAI's structure and how it's like nonprofit going for profit, being sued by Elon for this whole setup of how they've structured the company. I don't even know what they're at today. Clearly, they're making tons of money. Uh, they're still private as far as I'm concerned, but I don't know about the nonprofit arm versus the for-profit company structure. I think it has a lot of drama when it comes up, but there's so much other drama that is kind of a backseat in terms of the AI, headline news for the week. So, yeah, a little interesting. I think OpenAI definitely wants to cast shame on the Meta, uh, recruiting approaches, because they just probably can't compete, at least with real cash money, compared to like a private evaluation. But
Hmm.
yeah, definitely a little bit sensical in terms of headlines of like, coming into our house and stealing our people. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
Good to get some headlines. I think that's what they want, to draw attention, to make Meta look worse and therefore keep more of their talent. It's definitely right now a time, if you're an AI employer, probably to check in with your employees, make sure they're valued, make sure they're happy. If not, they'll probably end up at Meta in the next, 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. Hey, Meta, you know my number. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's interesting. And it's funny, it's funny that I think Sam is the one that broke, or that specifically mentioned the dollar amount of these offers, like the $100 million. I'm pretty sure that came from Sam on a
That was early
podcast he was
too.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that
It's,
was like 2 months or 3 months before it all happened, and people said that's complete BS. So then it ended up
yeah.
being true.
And Meta's kind of denied. They've said, I think there was a Q&A that they did within internally, that Wired was reporting, that they said it's not like $100 million cash. It's more complicated than that. So they're not outright denying it, but they're kind of, they're not being as firm as like what Sam had said. And it's interesting because a lot of what OpenAI has done, they do a lot of things publicly, I think strategically, and they say things publicly strategically. And it's interesting to think why, and I don't know, I don't really have any speculation, but why Sam would just come out right and say that they're losing employees to Meta for these, fantastic offers. If you're someone getting that offer, you're probably pretty excited. Um, it's interesting for him to disclose that, and I don't know if they're kind of playing the victim card or trying to get the sympathy vote. I don't know, but I'm sure there's a reason behind it. It's not just haphazard. So I'll be curious to
Yeah,
watch.
it made headlines back then. However, people quickly dismiss it, saying that's ridiculous. And now 100 million is like the lower end. We've seen 300 million reportedly, for
Mm.
an Apple, lead researcher. So yeah, it's crazy. It's definitely pay I've never expected from these folks. I know this is a specialized skill set, but man, the competition is heating up. The pay is heating up. This is only the start. I don't know where this is going to go. If AI proves to be the powerful, tooling, coding agent that we're expecting it to be, I'm hoping Meta can make a large impact given their new kind of roster of super intelligence. But we'll have to
Hmm.
wait and see. Really, it takes time to build these cool things, takes time to train, takes time to even get the hardware to train these models, which sounds like they're building. So all that combined, I imagine 2026 would be a big year for them. And I've checked their stock, uh, still at the 700 mark. Great for them. After all this news, I expect it to pop off a little bit. It sounds like market reaction is let's wait and see, or maybe this is already
Hmm.
priced in a few days of like before. I don't know, but wasn't as big of a reaction as I expected, given we've
Yeah.
just collected intelligent folks to run the super intelligence team.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that might be the recognition that they had to shell out a lot of money to get them, and that'll show
Hmm.
up somewhere on the P&L. But then
Yeah,
also too, yeah, I think there's a recognition that Meta's a little bit behind. They're behind Google, they're
yeah, definitely.
behind, and so you can see this as a brilliant strategic move, and they're getting the top talent. But you can also see this, and again, OpenAI has said this as kind of like a desperate move, and so you can kind of
Hmm.
pick. You're probably in one of those two camps and how you think about it. So, yeah, we'll see if it all pays out for them or plays out,
Yeah,
however you want to say it.
we will see. I'm excited. Hopefully, they make cool stuff that we use.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, so we can jump into releases. It's been a crazy 2 weeks, things being released left and right. One of the biggest releases, I would say, in the past few days has been Kimi's K2 model. And so this is a big one for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it's open source and open weights. So this means that you could technically run it on your own computer. However, it's 1 trillion parameters, which is a large model. And I think if you download it from Hugging Face, it's roughly 900 gigabytes. So making sure you can download and run that on your local Mac, no way, no chance. But the biggest thing is that it scores really high on benchmarks. So we've had Anthropic release their awesome like Claude 4 models, which is Sonnet and Opus, which do really, really well and are powering the craze of Claude Code. The big deal about this new model is that it also is really good at tool calling. So when we look at models today, there's Gemini 2.5 Flash, 2.5 Pro. There's OpenAI O 03, O1, etc., and then there's Claude. And outside of that, there's not too much going on. But even within those three, I would say Gemini is not that good at tool calling. So Claude has built a really good model for tool calling, basically training the model to do that from the ground up. And I think this is the first model that has replicated the success of tool calling. So we're basically calling this new Kimi K2 model very agentic. Like there's almost like a flavor profile for these new models. One is high intelligence and the other is agentic. And Claude Code has really shown that if you can make an agentic model, it can do incredible things. You can almost take it as in the next evolution for OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic, would I rather have a highly successful agentic AI that maybe is not as smart, or a new AI model that comes out that's smarter but less successful with tool calls? And to me, it seems like we're getting to the point where that tool calling is the bread and butter. And if you're not
Hmm.
scoring high in benchmarks that measure that, your model might not get adopted because all these models are getting plugged into Cursor, other AI IDEs, and the main factor for getting these experiences to work and work well is the reliability of tool calling. So
Hmm.
this is a huge release, open source, 1 trillion parameters, very large. It's a non-thinking model as well, so it doesn't do the whole thinking prologue that kind of started with DeepSeek, where you ask it a question, you see this internal monologue, and it still scores really, really high. So very, very exciting. I think the model itself probably won't be run that much since it's so large, but what the research shows, how they train the model, all that will be used to kind of create the next generation of models, after it. It's very, very similar to DeepSeek, where no one's really using DeepSeek today, but the fact that it was released, open source, open weight, had kind of a revolution in scores where it kind of met the OpenAI family at the time, like in December. This is that same large moment of open source, high intelligence with tool calling. So really,
Yeah.
really exciting.
Well, and it's interesting. I think one thing that just immediately sprung to mind was I remember when DeepSeek came out, it was, oh, this is the OpenAI killer, the Chat GPT killer, because
Mhm.
it's, free to use and it's just as good, if not better, blah, blah, blah. But I agree that I haven't really heard much usage out of DeepSeek since that announcement, really. I'm sure people are using it here and there, but like not to the same level commercially that the other ones are being used. But I totally echo. I think the tool calling thing is, especially and I'll just say in my line of work in accounting, because a lot of times we have to do something a certain way. We don't want that to be abstract. We've talked a lot about this in other podcast episodes where like I want the tool, the AI, I want it to do the specific thing. I don't want you to interpret my instructions and do it a different way. And so having tool calling and having that be precise and having the tools be, well written and defined is like, that's where I think, again, for accounting, super useful. And I'd rather have that versus some brilliant, PhD level model that I don't need that level of intelligence. I need you to understand my query and then go figure out the right place to do that. It was interesting. I was tinkering around with LangGraph, and I had written a simple, agent, we'll call it, that has two tools. I had one that was it would sort the letters or the characters in a word alphabetically. So if you took zebra, it should do A B, whatever R Z A, whatever, you know what I mean. And so if it would do that, and then the other tool call was like check if it's a palindrome. And so if you give it race car, it'll say, yep, this is a palindrome. If you give it something else, it'll say, no, this is not a palindrome. And what was interesting, and I was just tinkering with it, I didn't spend a ton of time with it, but it was interesting because depending on the model I was using, I think it just defaulted to 4.0 mini. Um, it would sometimes call the tool, and I could see in LangGraph, the tool call and the response. But then I think I had switched it over to Gemini at some point, and it was doing those checks, or it was doing those things without calling the tool. It was just checking the palindrome. It wasn't calling the tool, palindrome checker or alphabetical sorter. And it was interesting because I didn't really change like the system prompt at all. So to your point about like different models kind of interpreting tools differently and how they use tools, it's kind of you got to find what works for you in your own situation, and again having like the trace to kind of see that the agent was calling those tools versus not was helpful, because if I wasn't really looking at that, I wouldn't know like necessarily how the agent got to the answer it gave me, which I think is important. Again, as people start building out more and more custom, agents with AI, it's like make sure you understand how the AI is getting that answer, not just what the answer is, and taking that as gospel. Because
Mhm.
we've talked about hallucinations a lot, but sometimes they'll give you the right answer, but how it got there, you probably want to understand how it got there to some degree.
Yeah, and Gemini 2.5 Pro was the leading model for a short stint of time, kind of before this new agentic models came out with tool calling. So they have their time in place, and I think if you're not calling tools, you're okay with coming out with a better model. But I think right now, my guess is a lot of these leading AI companies are coming out with, hitting a baseline of 98, 99% tool calling accuracy first, and then trying to increase that intelligence. And I have no background in making an advanced AI model, so that's probably a gross, simplification. But again, I think if OpenAI count with a 15% smarter model, but 5% worse tool calling, I probably would not pick it up. And I think that's kind of what we looked at. We can talk about Grok a little bit, but Grok 4 came out, hit top of the leaderboard on a few intelligence evaluations, but they're just not that good at tool calling. So it doesn't pull me away from Claude Code and Anthropic models. But we can just wrap on Kimi. A few other interesting details is that they have a modified MIT license. In that license is essentially MIT at the top, and at the bottom they have a disclaimer saying, if you use our AI model in commercial products with more than 100 million monthly active users or 20 million in monthly recurring revenue, then you have to say that you use our model. So this kind of exists from the DeepSeek land, where DeepSeek was open source, open weights. However, their license made it explicit that I think if you had over 600 million monthly active users or X amount of dollars, you had to disclose it, or I think maybe you couldn't even use it. I
Mm.
can't remember the exact stipulations, but there's a clear divide in that if you're not a big corporation with lots of users or making lots of money, it's completely free and open to use. But once you cross that threshold where you'd use it in a large scale, then you'd either have to attribute it, which would drive a lot more recognition, or you can't use it at all. I think in DeepSeek's case, so a very interesting license, and it clearly has a separation, a very clear cut line of can you use it or not, and these are the restrictions behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know of anything. I'm speaking out of some ignorance here, but traditionally, when I think of open source, I think of like truly open source, like in terms of like I don't know, fast API, pandas, like Laravel, right? I think is open source. There's no limit on how much you use, and like if your project, if your Laravel project does $200 million a month, you got to start paying, the
Mhm.
Laravel Foundation or whatever. So that's interesting. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
freemium. It's basically like a
Is
freemium
is it
model.
enforceable? We don't really know. I think that was some of the
Yeah.
discussion. Is it exists there? Who's going to enforce it? Who's going to self-report? Not really sure. But on top of that, it's a relatively cheap inference cost. So I think today the rough standard is like Anthropic is serving 1 million tokens for input at I think $1, and then output for their same amount as like $15, almost like a $1 to $15 ratio. And I think their pricing was like 20 cents per million on input. And I think like $1.50 for output. So roughly like 10x cheaper on both sides. And it gets very close to Anthropic's performance. So really exciting, high intelligence tool calling, open source with a caveat, and hosted and cheap. It is a China model, so you have to be careful of what you send to it. But at the current status, pretty exciting. And I think it'll be used to up level the next models that come after it. Again, it doesn't have like a reasoning mode. It doesn't do, I think, images, but it's kind of the groundwork for a next generation, next evolution of models. So you can try it out, I think, on Kimi.chat. Let me check real quick. No, it's not that. I'll have to find it in the show notes. Or maybe it's Kimi.com. Yeah, okay. Kimi.com. If you go to that, you're presented with a chat window. Unfortunately, it's not as good as Claude and ChatGPT because those are very refined and polished chat interfaces. But if you want to give it a run, go to Kimi.com, type in a query, and check it out.
Nice. Always something new. Cool.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we talked about Grok 4 a little bit. Won't go too deep into it, but released by X's AI team called XAI. Released about a week ago. They had a live stream talking about it at night, and it hit top of the leaderboards on intelligence, which was a first for the XAI team. So hats off to them. But again, as we've talked about just minutes ago, not necessarily the number one end all be all me adopting a model. If I can't, you know, use tool calling effectively, it kind of falls apart. So impressive results nonetheless, but I think I'll probably pass on that model. And their pricing, I think, is the same as Grok 3. So I think it's in the ballpark of like Anthropic, Sonnet, and Claude models. Not as cheap as Kimi. The
Hmm.
one call out, I think, from Grok 4 is they didn't do a lot of safety training. So when the model first came out a few days ago, there was a bunch of reports of it being able to instruct on how to make a nuke, how to make world-ending drugs, how to make a plague, very scary things that I'm even scared to type in as like a quote-unquote safety tester or red teamer. Like, I don't know what data goes on, but these people clearly have tried it and checked it, and they've posted screenshots that are redacted, essentially Grok for searching the internet, finding Wikipedia pages about chemicals, warfare, etc., and composing a pretty detailed answer of how you can do some nefarious things. So since
Hmm.
then, they've came out and provided some safety restrictions, basically trying to identify if it's like self-harm, warfare, etc. And they've started blocking those, but it's kind of after the fact.
Yeah.
Things that may have already been talked about. So a little bit of a miss there on their end. I think they don't care too much about safety, where other AI labs care a lot more about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's got their own little flavor of what they prioritize and build for versus others. I just had we're calling an audible here on the podcast real fast. I just had this is probably just like a I don't know, an obvious idea, but kind of also like just I don't know, sci-fi and dumb even. But neural link, I think is what it's called, the little brain chip that goes inside people's brains that's being experimented with. We've heard stories, and I think that's very experimental. Obviously, I think they only have like 5 or 6 people that have gotten the chip, and they're really good at playing video games. Where they can like headshot people in a video game, like pros, because they have this chip in their brain. But like, it'd be really fascinating if they could like just upload one of these models to one of those chips, and all of a sudden this person knows everything. And I don't know if that's the plan, but
I think that is the plan eventually, but they need to connect the like brain to human interface a little bit better. I think you can use your brain to like move things or like
mhm,
I don't know, like move control objects, but I don't know if you can talk to it, get an AI response or how that all
yeah,
works. But getting a chip in there is the first step. Now unlocking it to do other things. Hopefully they've thought of that, and I'm sure
yeah.
they have. Would be pretty cool.
Which like it's obviously not that it's impressive and crazy. I shouldn't say it's not that cool, but like right now you can take out your phone and look up anything in the world and get an answer. And is that really that different than thinking it and then having the answer in your head? But yeah, it just seems like those two timelines converge nicely of like AI and Neuralink or whatever. And now it's kind of like we're at this point where that chip can be plugged into the internet, so to speak, and draw from one of these models, then that's pretty powerful
Well,
for
if you
that
think about
person.
it, they're both Elon companies.
Yeah,
Grok 3, I think, was integrated within the Tesla vehicle. So Grok 4 is smarter, more capable. I wouldn't be surprised if Grok 4 makes it in the vehicle, but he has an impressive kind of like army of companies all doing
mm,
different things, all slightly related or could benefit off the other companies. So, yeah, hopefully they have a nice synergy together and Neuralink can access some of these things. But it would be
yeah,
crazy to walk around with someone who's got Grok 4 in their head, who's got like PhD level research across, thousands of world level topics that you could just walk by something and say, how does that work? And like, boom, immediate answer in your head, off running off a chip or something, or a chip connected to your phone. I don't know. Pretty cool though.
here's the plan, and I'm gonna say this, and we can pin this for in 3 to 4 years when it's come true. The strategy that Elon's going for is he's got like his robotics company. I think it's called Optimus, or something like that, where they
I
make
hadn't even
little
heard of
like
that one, but I'm not surprised.
yeah, they got like little humanoid robots, right? And so that like it's like iRobot, very like unimpressive right now. They did like a demo and it's whatever, but like that is something that he's working on. He's got the SpaceX, right? So here's the strategy. Everyone's gonna want a neural link in their brain at some point because that's just what people they want to have access to all those things. They want to talk telekinetically with their buddies over the internet in their brain. I don't know, but they're all gonna get that chip, and it's gonna be running Grok because that's his model, his baby. And then what's gonna happen is the humanoids, robots, he's gonna not he, but like someone's gonna flip a switch, and all the brain that is or the chip that's controlling our brain and Neuralink is going to now basically force us to do work like
Wow. Like where the
technology. We don't
Tesla
have
fleet of
free will.
humans.
Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
have free will anymore, and we work for the humanoids and for like the Grok ecosystem to build out these rocket ships for SpaceX to go to Mars. That's like, and
Wow.
then we're
Well,
gonna
that
we're
that
gonna
is
go as a
huge.
unified like hive mind of like half human, half robots going to Mars. I'm telling you right now, it's
That's
happening.
a I love that idea. It sounds very, very scary. It'd be very hard to convince billions of people to get a Neuralink, but with his track record, who knows what's possible?
Say, hey, it's free. You can come in here. You'd be so much smarter. You can, you can, the
Promotions.
people, yeah. Don't you want to make more money? Yeah, absolutely. And then they
Yeah.
got you and they flip the switch and you can't take it out yourself. You don't know how to do that. You don't know how to do open brain surgery. So
Yeah.
it's like a
We should
tattoo.
we should reach out to Black Mirror. I think it'd be great to have a fake Elon Musk with all these companies and people would really get it. Be like, wow, Ben's
Yeah.
vision is now on Netflix and it hits pretty hard. So yeah, you
You
heard it
heard it
here,
here
folks.
first. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
audible success. I love your idea. Moving on to Claude Code. So this basically 2 days ago, I think Claude came out or Anthropic came out with like Windows access. And I was on in the airport yesterday, flying home, and I was in an airport lounge. I was throwing Claude at everything because if you know me, I'll spend a few days away from the computer in downtime. I'll think, oh, how will that work? How would that work? So I got back to my computer finally, uh, went to the lounge, opened it up, and started, Claude coding like I normally do. And surprisingly enough, I had the banner that pops up when you use Claude Code saying you're approaching your limit. And I saw that sooner than normal, and I thought that's a little odd, as someone who's used it since beginning of June, which again, I'll pat myself on the back. I was early, and I was early not only to using it, but knowing that it was going to be big. So great job to me. But
You get
more
a cookie.
realistically, yeah, more realistically, I knew that was early, and so I just pushed along. I think people have kind of assimilated it to a low battery on an iPhone screenshot, where you kind of see this important piece of uh, display, and you kind of think, "Oh, that's interesting." So I sent a picture to Ben saying, "Oh, wow, like my limit feels pretty low today. I haven't done that much work." And then about an hour later, I get a full block from Claude. So ask it to do something, says you've hit the limit. And I've never had that happen before in a whole, month and a half of using Claude Code. And I pay for their top plan. I've never had it fully block me. So I didn't really get it. I tried switching models. So by default, I use Opus, which is their slower but more intelligent model. I went inside Claude Code and used their /model command to change it to Sonnet. Then I asked the AI agent, I said, continue exactly where you left off. And it said, no, you've hit the limit. And I go, damn, like, I thought I paid for the unlimited plan, which is quoted at 20x the normal usage. And I had never even gotten that warning very often, maybe like twice or three times, and definitely within the past like 2.5 weeks. So I texted Ben. I said, wow, I'm like completely locked out. I've hit my limits. I have a reset timer of, I think at 10 p.m. it's unlocked. So I was blown away because we've talked about it on the podcast. Claude Code is seriously the best coding AI agent and best AI agent in general because of the tool use and because Anthropic builds the tool and the model. They have a great feedback loop there. But it gets to that point where we've talked about people posting these screenshots, boasting about their usage. Everyone and their mother are signing up. Now we're at a point where Claude Code, hopefully it doesn't get saturated. It's feeling saturated. It sucks. As someone who is early to the game, I'm now, competing with all these others. I don't know what to think of it. It's not great.
All good things come to an end, Bradley. We talked about on the podcast before that like the more that you promote how much you're just like juicing the model and juicing your usage, and you're not alone. People have really kind of, we talked about how, post your stats or don't post them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But yeah, they must have been. I mean, yeah, it's interesting because you had the max model, or max plan, which means unlimited. Unlimited means unlimited. Last I checked, so like I don't know how that's even allowed. To be honest with you, like
Yeah,
that seems
there's like
kind
a
of.
star when you sign up saying, I think there's like some usage limits, which they do outline, but they have clearly shrunk that window without any communication. And Cursor had a giant pricing shift kerfuffle that, kind of ruined people's trust. Anthropic with Claude Code, they're not at that level yet where I'm not like, I paid for this, I'm not getting it. I felt like a tinge of that where before I was like free roaming. I could do whatever I wanted. It felt like. And I think what
Mhm.
people have been doing now is there's been a layer of software on top of Claude Code to make it easier to manage multiple Claude Code instances. Basically, UIs that will take one single prompt and kind of like span it across 3 or 4 Claude Code sessions because there's some randomness when it generates the code with an LLM. So now I think people have really optimized multi-cloud code usage and are just draining the pool of GPUs from others. And due to that, I think they're shortening the limits on Claude Max plans, even the top $200 plan, really to have more capacity for others. Because if I boot up Claude Code and I can't use it at all, that sucks. If
Mhm.
I can have an hour or two of productive coding, that's great. What I'd really like is 4 or 5 hours, but I think I'm getting limited in that in between area because other people are using it. So
Yeah.
I kind of blame, myself a little bit, maybe others who have built tools to use Claude Code more, which is a good thing, but there's only so many GPUs. It's not an infinite, resource. Hardware is powering all this. So it's kind of in a weird spot. I love it. I don't like the recent changes. I don't know where they're going to go from here, given they just released Windows, and that might spawn a whole new community of developers to pick it up and use it. So if Anthropic is listening, maybe make the Claude Max 20x plan. That's $200, a little bit more unlimited. I don't really know where to put it. I mean, I think we're hoping we get better models and more effective tooling, but if I get locked out after what it felt like a really productive session right at the peak of me making changes, kind of sucked.
Yeah.
Honestly, kind of sucked.
Yeah.
And one other thing I saw recently was I think Claude Code signups were disabled, so you can clearly tell something was in the water of usage is high, people love it, like not only me but lots of people on Twitter. What are they going to do? And Anthropic came out to confirm that they don't kind of downgrade the model intelligence when it's under peak load. They say they don't alter anything. There's been rumors going around that like Claude is better on the weekdays or like during the workday or in the weekends, whatever. Timing aside, I think people are really concerned that OpenAI, other model providers are secretly behind the scenes, like downgrading models just to save costs. I think they came out to confirm that they don't do that, which is great. But they still have a problem on their hands. I'm very curious how much money, these power users like myself or maybe even others who use it a lot more, how much money they're losing from that crew and how much money they're making off the crew that buys it for $200 and doesn't use it at all.
Hmm.
Given the recent scale back of limits, you'd be hard pressed to think that these power users are really killing the budget. And it might be time for changes. Knock on wood, it doesn't affect me, but yeah, maybe the glory period of Claude Code, maybe coming to an end. I hate to say it. I'm not sure.
I have two thoughts on that. I think the first one is if they came to you and said, "Hey, it's unlimited, like really unlimited, is $500 a month," would you still buy it?
Probably. May that'd probably be my ceiling. Maybe like 400, 500. I think it would actually devote me to using it more. Where $200,
Mm,
at least in my current setup, I'm like, I definitely get a lot of usage out of it. But $500 feels like a steep, 2x pricing. So
yeah,
I'd probably pay for it though, if it was truly unlimited. Anything
yeah,
past that, I feel like you have to be a real business. But right now, I use it on the side. My side business isn't raking in the cash, so that's kind of my limit, I would say.
yeah, yeah. And I think the other point that's interesting is, Claude Code, and I would just say Claude more generally is definitely less popular than, well, ChatGPT is the most popular and OpenAI, of course, but um, I don't know where Gemini's popularity stands. Obviously, they are making up ground and they've made up a ton of ground, but in terms of just overall usage, Claude and ChatGPT, I feel like were the kind of the first two on the scene that really made a dent. But I guess where I'm going with this is I think Claude is probably mostly used by like engineers, like whereas like ChatGPT and Gemini probably have a more broad use case. So I would wager that, and this I'm just purely speculating, I don't have any details, but I would wager that the Claude users are less than ChatGPT, and I would even probably say Gemini, but the usage is more because engineers like yourself and others are just slamming that thing because it is the best model, and everyone agrees that that is the best model for coding. It's not even really
Hmm.
contested. And so you probably have a scenario where you have fewer users than like the other names maybe, but you have users that really use it because obviously you're writing code bases and the pricing and is based on like token output. And so if you're generating whole files and you know websites architecture, then that's obviously a huge amount of tokens that it's generating and therefore expensive to run. So it's interesting to kind of compare it compared to those other more broad based models that have a more general appeal, I guess.
Yeah, like I use ChatGPT for various questions and we'll use it maybe once a day at maximum. But Claude Code, when I get the steam and momentum and like focus time to do 2 to 3 hours, I can start a task on my mobile app. I can start a task on my web app. I can ask it to plan, which it goes reads a bunch of code and creates a plan. I've recently switched to this dangerously skip permissions flag, which like doesn't ask me if it should do anything. It just does it. So it's fully autonomous, thinks a lot, and it probably costs them a decent amount of money. And I think all this Twitter hype of Claude Code, which I've contributed slightly, but I don't have a ton of followers. So if you're listening, go follow me on X. But there's been so much, I sell it, but others have sold it way, way more. And I think developers who love something really put their mouth behind it. They'll say, hey, out of 5 tools, and in the AI race, all these tools are kind of interchangeable. So when Claude Code is here to stay, at least for the past 2 months, everyone's talking about it. Like, you'll see it on your feed if you use it or not. But it's clear that when developers like something, they'll talk about it. And Anthropic has won clearly on the front of the agentic CLI, which we kind of talked about last podcast. But yeah, I'm a bit concerned to see what the future is. It's not a complete red flag. It's an orange flag in my book where, we'll have to see if it regresses where they buy more GPUs and I can use it more, or it gets worse. I have a shorter and shorter session time, less tokens output. So we'll have to see. I'll report back in the next pod how things look, because I'll definitely be using it. But just a little bit of a warning for those who have been listening to our podcast episodes. I'm still a supporter officially, but things are changing, and I think this kind of exists for the ecosystem at large. Like we saw, Cursor had a pricing issue, which they had to incorrectly price things, and people got really confused. Part of that is I think these companies are trying to make more money, turn a profit, kind of finalize on pricing, because it used to just be $20 or $200. I think we're getting to that age where you ask me $500, I can really see that become a reality given all these things considered, where I'm getting a lot of value for 200. If they scale it up, now that I've seen the power, I would do it. If they told me $500 to start with, I'd say, oh, I don't know. So I think either they've been planning it or they're running into an issue, but changes are coming is my prediction in the next 2 to 3 months. Hopefully those changes are for the better.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, I guess this is maybe a call to action for our listeners. What price would you, and I guess this is specific to Claude Code users, but for those that are using Claude Code, what price would you kind of walk away from, would you say is too much? So Brad already said he's locked in for $500, but some people are using it and they're getting like $5,000 worth of usage when they look at their stats. Would you pay that much, or would you say, no, I'm gonna walk away and try Gemini CLI once it hits $800? So again, listeners, let us know in the comments, or shoot Brad or I a Twitter message, because I'd be curious what people's kind of ceiling is on that price, just given how much you get out of it right now. It's one of those things where it's like there's a limit to how much I'm willing to pay for this, but maybe I can do a little bit more if that means I really get a true unlimited. Again, I don't know how their unlimited is not unlimited, but whatever. Beside the point.
Yeah. And then we'll quickly call out that Amazon released Kiro, their kind of competitor to Cursor. One of their unique features from their product announcement was kind of spec-driven development. So as we've seen AI tools evolve over kind of the past 6 to 12 months, lots of the prompt engineering has fallen away, and now we're getting to this spec-driven development where we have this giant kind of PDF or product spec outline to say what the feature is, what the requirements are, essentially the job of a product manager to define a new feature at a software company. So I think their AI IDE has this built-in workflow for spec-driven development, as they've coined the phrase. I haven't used it. I think Amazon has a few tools and CLIs in the AI IDE or agent space. So this is just another competitor in the mix. We'll have to report back when we use it. But to jump into our next one, it ties directly into Windsurf. So we kind of had the Windsurf Cursor side-by-side battle. These two companies and AI IDEs were literally head and head. And what we had saw from Twitter was basically, month over month, it was, I use Cursor, I would never touch Windsurf. Oh my God, I used Cursor and picked up Windsurf, I would never go back to Cursor. And so all these things considered, there's a huge kind of news in the past week that the Windsurf CEO and a few of their executives are being kind of acqui-hired, or maybe just poached, as we've talked about, and joining Google, which is a big deal. And in this kind of midst of announcements, initially they had kind of left their employees behind, everyone that was outside of this Google deal. And over the past 24 hours after that happened, a bunch of bad press came out saying their CEO did a bad job, their leadership should have negotiated a better package for those left behind, and partly on Google, where they're taking the meta approach, which is, I'm not going to acquire the company, but I'm going to acquire the key stakeholders. And so this is a new trend in AI, acquisitions. But thankfully, after that, in a span of news, is that the rest of the Windsurf company for those who did not join Google and were hand selected, are actually being acquired by Cognition Labs, which is the creator of Devin. So the kind of initial autonomous coding agent. We've talked about Devin before, but yeah, a bit of crazy news is one is Windsurf is kind of departing. Their key leadership folks are departing, which is a big change. You know, who knows how much they got paid from Google. Two is wow, they left the rest of the crew behind. A huge mistake. And then I think three, they made up for that, which is great. But probably after a lot of backlash and communication. So a whole whirlwind of there, and we're clearly getting into an interesting age where companies at big tech are clearly looking to poach people. And I think with all of these changes, I'm not sure Windsurf is really here to stay. So maybe it's now just going to be Cursor and Kiro. I don't think it's a
Yeah.
good look for them.
It's interesting because I think probably in April or May, we had talked about on the podcast because it was news, and there's a TechCrunch article talking about how OpenAI was the one that was going to be buying Windsurf, and that was
Mm-hmm.
pretty much a done deal. And I think the number that we had heard was like $3 billion was the offer that OpenAI was making to Windsurf. Again, all reported, nothing confirmed, and then it kind of died. Um, and I thought it was like basically official. And I remember recording the podcast with you and you being like, I don't think it's official. I'm like, well, this TechCrunch says it's done, So like, I don't know. And so we never really heard anything from that point on. And then, yeah, come to find out, of course, Google, and what Google did was they, like you said, acqui-hired, and they like bought some licensing and some IP, and
Yeah.
then they brought over some key people. So the way that it made it sound, and it's a little bit complicated, and I won't profess to know all the details and ins and outs, but the way it made it sound was that basically Windsurf, what was left of Windsurf was like the employees and like some limited set or limited features of Windsurf, because like again, Google acquired not just the people, but they acquired some other kind of IP from the acquisition or acquihire. And what's interesting is more in the articles that have kind of come out since is that I guess OpenAI wasn't able to, follow through with that acquisition, or it didn't pan out, I guess, because of Microsoft's involvement in OpenAI. Just for refreshers, Microsoft and OpenAI have this kind of weird, I think they call it a partnership. And basically, the reporting is, I think it's from Wired or TechCrunch. I'll link it. I'll find it and link it. But that, or it's from Infoworld.com. But that Microsoft, when OpenAI was kind of in plans to buy Windsurf, Microsoft was apparently like, oh, okay, great, we'll have that too, because any technology or IP that you guys develop or acquire, that's kind of part of our partnership. And I guess OpenAI was like, no, hold the phone. That's not how this works. This is ours if we acquire it. Because of course Microsoft has its own, IDE. They've of course have always had Visual Studio Code in Visual Studio. And they're a competitor in that space, and right, they're a direct competitor to Cursor, to Windsurf. And so I guess OpenAI was like, no, this is ours. And Microsoft's like, well, no, this is going to fold nicely into our ecosystem with Copilot and all that. So it's interesting to kind of hear that be the kind of stopping point with OpenAI, and more to come probably on that relationship, because Microsoft had a pretty heavy hand in getting Sam Altman back into OpenAI when he was fired the first time, I think last year. So Microsoft's kind of, they're part of this journey, but they're kind of sometimes in the back burner or kind of behind the scenes until a big moment happens, like Sam getting fired, or them looking to acquire this technology in Windsurf, and cause a little bit of a hurdle. So interesting. I'm sure there'll be more events with Microsoft and
Yeah.
OpenAI in the future.
And I think there's more details to come out about the deals, specifically about the folks joining Google and about Cognition acquiring Windsurf. I think there's, good data right now or good reporting, but I think as these things play out, we'll get a lot more insights. But I think one last note is Cognition kind of highlighted that Windsurf had, I think, 350 business customers on Windsurf, and I think a disclosed amount of money they were making either annually or monthly. So they had kind of acquired a growing business in their mind. So pretty cool. I mean, it kind of shows you that these companies are very, very important. But when these key leaders are selected, not everyone can make the cut. And I think you got to be careful about the AI company that you join because this could happen to you. And it
Hmm.
seems like it sucked. I think the employees were pissed off, and hopefully things are slightly better. But I'm sure just that feeling of being left behind, especially when in the AI age, people are working pretty hard to kind
Yeah.
of win and win big. Kind of a bummer to see, but hopefully things are resolved and moving forward less of this happens. But I think the key theme here is that if you're working at an AI lab, and you're important, whether that's C-suite, researcher, et cetera, big packages are there for you at any of these big tech companies.
Yeah. Just real quick, because you mentioned it, TechCrunch back in April, they reported, according to a source, of course, Windsurf is a private company, that its ARR, so annual recurring revenue, was $100 million, up from $40 million in February. So
Mm.
from February 2025 to April 2025, when this article was written, it went from 40 million in ARR to 100 million ARR. That was what was reported. So kind of crazy.
Solid. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Imagine being there during that time. Pretty crazy. One thing before we kind of move on and close out with our bookmarks, we talked about Kiro, the Amazon, IDE. We talked about Claude. And we talked about like Gemini CLI and Codex. We've talked about these CLIs and these companies, especially these foundational models like so OpenAI and Gemini, making Codex, making uh, you know, I think Google has its own. I think it's called Jules. We haven't really talked about Jules, but I think Jules is like an IDE that's kind of Google's version. So I think it's gonna be really interesting, especially when Amazon came into that space and I saw that announcement, where these IDEs like Cursor, like Windsurf, like Devin, um, even Claude Code, and I know I'm gonna like boil your blood here in a second, but like they don't have the like infrastructure like Google and Amazon too. If we kind of just focus on them for a second, right? Because in the past, when you would write software, and let's just talk about web apps, I guess. When you'd make a web app, you would write all your code, you'd have your code base, and then you'd go deploy that on like a service, whether it was, DigitalOcean or, you certainly know this 1,000 times better than I do, but like, you go deploy it somewhere, right? It seems like now with AI agents, you can, and I'm a Google fanboy. I've made that very clear on this podcast. You can develop your AI agent in Jules, and using Google's ADK, right, their agent development kit, and then you can host it in Google Cloud Console, all within simple CLI commands. And it just seems a bit more of like a better experience, like a better packaged experience versus, oh, I wrote my code base in Cursor or you know uh, PHP Storm or whatever that one's called, right?
Hmm.
PyCharm. I've written all this in this specific IDE. Then I got to go, bring it over here into this to deploy it and do all this extra stuff. It just seems like, in the case for Amazon, I can write these apps in Kiro, and then of course a lot of people use AWS for deploying their websites, right? And so like having that connection, that more integrated end to end, I write the code in this IDE that Amazon's a part of, then I deploy it in their system that they own. It just seems like that's going to be the way to go. And I feel like Cursor and Claude, Anthropic doesn't have that. So they're kind of in the bucket of Cursor, Windsurf, in my opinion. Um, they don't have that. And so I don't know. I'm curious what you think about that. Like, does that make a difference to you? Or do you think that's kind of, irrelevant to the overall process of building something?
I think it depends on kind of the customer profile. So for me, I want high intelligence coding agents, and Claude Code knocks that out of the park. I think those integrated solutions that you can code and deploy, I think that target audience is probably kind of like the low code, no code crew. I think that will gain a lot of money. That's a whole section of companies that have these employees and individuals who are trying to just build stuff. However, I think there's the other bucket where, serious software shops that just really need complicated, intelligent reasoning models that can reason over a legacy large code base. And I think those are a different category, and I care less that the code changes I make, will make it easy to deploy. For a lot of these companies, that whole deployment is a solved problem, so we don't have to worry about that as much. So I think it's two separate categories. I think the excitement of making the barrier to deployment lower for these integrated tools, excellent. But for me personally, again, that's more or less a solved problem, not too complicated, although it takes time to understand. I think I would love to use whatever tool is the smartest, and that currently is kind of the Claude Code bucket. So I think they exist differently. I think with these easy to deploy solutions, they spend less time on making the most intelligent model, but more time on the end-to-end experience. But Lovable Dev, or like Lovable, the AI IDE, they kind of have that solution where you can build out like a React front end using like Next.js, using kind of key infrastructure pieces that they've hand selected and trained their model on, such that you kind of build out this templated website. The good news is that once you're done with that, it's easy to deploy. So it looks good, easy to deploy, etc. For most people, it makes a lot of sense, but for others that want more control, want to choose their hosting provider, all these things that are important to some, not important to others, that's where I see that divide. And I think customer base is vastly different between those two groups.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think Cloud will get, or Anthropic will be acquired at some point. That's my hot take.
By
I'm gonna
who?
say in the next 12, I'm gonna say in the next 12 months. I don't name names, Brad, but I don't
Put
know.
that on the bingo card.
I know we got to revisit our bingo card just for our audience. We haven't forgot about our bingo card. Brad and I were going to talk about that actually this episode, but with all the announcements and talent stuff we talked about and releases, we just figured we didn't have time. So we're going to make that a priority next episode to revisit our bingo card and check in, because I already looked at it a little bit as we were preparing for this episode, and I was like, man, the cycle of news changes so fast that I'll just sneak peek it. The Greenland acquisition was one on my bingo card. It was obviously kind of a silly one, but like the U.S. would take control indirectly or directly of Greenland. Kind of a fun one, but that has completely moved away from the news. Even though at the time we recorded that was like all in the news. VP and president were in Greenland at some point, and so it was funny looking back on that bingo card as if it was like years ago, and it was really only like 5 months ago. But such is the way that news works these days. So anyways, we'll do that next episode.
Next episode, that'd be great.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's dive into our bookmarks and wrap this up, Brad.
Yeah,
I'll go first. Mine's a little bit quicker because it's a bookmark, which means I haven't really gotten fully invested in it yet, but it's on my list to do.
That's the main reason Twitter has the feature. Just in case anyone was confused, I'll look at this later, but I'll never look at it until I'm on the pod.
Exactly. And now I can't find it. Okay, yes it is. So it's the news that Google, I'm a fanboy, they release an MCP toolbox, and I'm also an MCP fanboy. So if you haven't picked that up by now through episode 25, then you haven't been listening, because I talk about MCP, I talk about Google quite a bit. But they basically, the tweet is, and I'll link it. I don't know who this person is. I think it's just like one of those AI aggregator accounts, but that's what made it into my feed. So Google just released MCP toolbox for databases to build AI agents with database access. So the line is, integrate your AI agent in less than 10 lines of Python code for built-in connection, pooling, and authentication with databases. So I'll just say this immediately struck a chord with me because in my line of work, and I'm sure this is true for lots of other, I'm sure you would resonate with this to some degree, but like getting information from a database is like, it's fundamental. Like it's like writing an email. Like you have to do that to do something useful typically. And in accounting, being able to connect an AI with like, our financials via a database, is very nice. And that's something that I think has been a hard challenge, especially for folks, traditional accounting folks that are not in a technical background, right? They don't work with Postgres. They don't work with, MySQL. And so it's kind of a foreign language, but having an AI agent be able to connect to that database and help kind of have the user read off databases in more of a natural language than no strict SQL syntax, I think is something that's going to be really potentially promising for accounting. And then also authentication. I've lamented how horrible, and this is probably a personal problem, I am at authentication in general, like OAuth. I've pounded my desk a few times trying to work with OAuth before, and so the fact that this is part of this package, again, I haven't looked at the package details itself, but they mentioned authentication in this, so I think it's promising if it can kind of solve those two things of getting access, getting an MCP tool to access databases and handle all the authentication that comes with that to make sure it's secure. Super exciting. So looking forward to getting in there.
Sounds cool. Definitely not short, but sounds cool. My bookmark.
Fair point.
I promise it will be short. So Claude Code is excellent.
Nice. Hey, cheers. Well done. You got me. Bring me in, officer. Oh man. All right, what's your bookmark? What do you got for me? I'm gonna put a shot clock on you.
So Claude Code is excellent, and Kimi K2 just came out. We're seeing cheap prices and pretty good intelligence. So what this guy created is a Claude Code Kimi Grok, and to break that down is Grok GROQ is serving Kimi K2 for inference. So essentially, what you can do is point Claude Code not at Anthropic servers, but at your own local server, which will then forward the request to Grok. So end all be all is that you're getting the Claude Code CLI and interface, but you're not paying the Claude Max $200 subscription, and hopefully you're getting decent performance with agentic coding via Claude Code. So yeah, check it out. He has a repo that you can clone. I think it's a simple Python script that boots up a server, and then you change a few environment variables and then boot up Claude, and then now you're basically using Kimi instead of the Anthropic models, hopefully for cheaper price. So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm just that is cool, and I'm just gonna complain that there's two Groks in the AI world, one with a Q and one with a K.
It's confusing.
It's really annoying, and I had to look it up because I'm like, wait, but I've seen that. That's not the first time I've looked that up. Sad to admit. But yeah, that's cool. So Grok with a Q, not with a K.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Alrighty. Well, that was a jam-packed episode, like always. And yeah, let us know what you guys think. Leave us a review. Give us a comment. Again, takeaway, I'm really curious to see what price people would be willing to pay, or what's the ceiling on what they'd be willing to pay for something like Claude Code to get the true max unlimited experience.
Yeah.
The Rolls Royce of token plans, if you were pricing plans.
Yeah. And additionally, check out Kimi.com. So during the podcast, I asked it, tell me about the Breakeven Brothers podcast, quite literally that query. And yeah, it found some great information, which pretty cool. And it's all for free. You don't have to sign up. So check out the latest and greatest kind of open source, open weight model on Kimi.com, and then give us a comment, how much you would pay for Claude Code. I think mine would maybe be 500. Who knows? Hopefully there's no price changes, but if you had to, what would that end up being, assuming you use it and you get value out of it?
Yeah. Pretty cool. Alrighty, We'll wrap that up then. Cool. Awesome, Brad. Until next time. See ya. Thank you for listening to the Breakeven Brothers podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you may be listening from. Also, be sure to subscribe to our show and YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Thanks, and take care. All views and opinions by Bradley and Bennett are solely their own and unaffiliated with any external parties.